Visit licensuraexams.com and try our samples completely free of charge.
The last disorder we're going to look at is the specific learning disorder. There are three specifiers according to the academic domain that's impaired.
Linton.
What?
Did you say specifiers?
Yes, dear. Yes, I did. Well, you got me there. I thought I'd sneak that in and try to get it past you, but that never seems to work. I know that's one of your favorite areas is specifiers. But let's have Hannah share your wonderful world of specifiers this time. What do you say?
Okay.
Yes. So just give it up and let her do it, okay?
Okay, for real, I'm team specifiers too, Stacey. Okay, so don't let Linton think
Details matter.
Details matter.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, definitely something to talk about, especially when we're going into specific learning disorders. So the three academic domains we're looking at with specific learning disorders are going to be reading. So for example, inaccurate or slow reading, difficulty, decoding words, poor reading comprehension. We're looking at written expression. So problems with spelling, grammar, clarity of writing, organized ideas in writing. We're looking at mathematics, struggling with number sense, memorizing math facts, understanding concepts, or mathematical reasoning. And now these skills, though, these child skills, they have to be substantially and persistently below the average.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'd like to know is the kind of criteria that you would use, Hannah, to diagnose a specific learning disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to really know about them, specific learning disorders, is that they often show up when a child starts school. We're talking about age 5, 6, 7. So the first thing is that the child has difficulty learning and using the academic skills in one of the domains I just mentioned. But next, the deficits also have to cause the child's academic performance to be much lower than what is expected for their age. Mm-hmm. So lots of poor grades, like teacher reports of the student struggling with material, performance below grade level on standardized assessments. This is where it kind of gets tricky, though, because if you talk about a kid who has ADHD, like symptoms, but it's only in math class or reading or writing, it's important to note that the kids will often anxiously avoid the subject they're having trouble in, right? So if these things kind of happen at the same time, we're like, it could be ADHD, but it's only in math class, right? They're not concentrating in math class. They're inattentive. They're getting out of their seat. They're acting, but you get them to reading and they're great. They're sitting there reading for 30 minutes. They're deep into their book, so we're looking at that strong distinction between those. So it's important to, again, put on that detective hat to determine which disorder criteria does that child meet.
Gotcha. And how about duration? I'm guessing this isn't just like you have a specific learning disorder with a reading impairment because you didn't like a certain book you were reading in class. Like, how would you distinguish a specific learning disorder from a child who's just having temporary difficulty grasping new concepts or being interested in that material?
Yeah, that's actually a perfect question. Yeah. So kind of for it to be diagnosed as a disorder, the learning difficulties need to persist over at least 6 months. Even with targeted academic help provided, we're talking tutoring, we're talking maybe you're doing a 504 plan where the kiddo's getting special, read aloud tests or something like that. It's beyond just these initial challenges, like I'm having trouble, we're moving up in reading to the chapter books. I'm having trouble keeping up. It's really an actual functional impairment over time, despite these safeguards or interventions that are in place. So they're not just failing, one bad reading or writing test. It's likely they're failing all of their tests and they're truly stunted in a way to where they really can't move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So, sort of like ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, the symptoms that you're saying about specific learning disorders may not really manifest until the academic demands become larger or they exceed the child's capabilities. So it may seem like that kid's doing pretty well, reasonably well in early grades, but the underlying deficits become way more apparent as the material that they have to deal with analysis, synthesis, and evaluative kind of functionings get much more and more complex.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And sometimes, I don't even see kiddos really struggle until they're maybe third, fourth, fifth grade sometimes, because they've been able to kind of coast, they've been able to be like, oh, I'm good. They get into maybe even middle school when expectations and homework and things are getting a little bit more complex. And you start seeing these kids really struggle, and you're like, well, I don't know what's wrong. I was good here, but I don't know. I got to this class and now I can't keep up. And that's when we really start investigating and looking deeper into it. But it is really ideal to catch learning issues early through screenings and targeted support before the child falls extremely behind their peers. So even if the severity of symptoms doesn't warrant a complete diagnosis, maybe it's just a 6-year-old who's really struggling with sight words or whatever it may be, but addressing those gaps proactively can make a really big difference in the long term of that child's academic career. So we have been known to catch things as early as kindergarten, when they're first learning their numbers and ABCs and writing and reading and stuff. But I will always preach about early intervention strategies, because it really helps to get the child the support they need, as well as catching the brain in the crucial first decade of life. So I always talk about that kind of when we're talking about these things, because the first 10 years of your life, your brain grows the most. We know this, and according to research and science. So when we talk about that first decade of life, early intervention is where we want to be. You really want to grasp that so you can give the best outcomes for later on.
That brings up a question I've always had with a lot of other diagnoses. The criteria, they'll say for a kid is only like 3, but for an adult, it'll be 6.
Or vice versa.
And okay, I understand that. They're trying to catch the diagnoses earlier. Okay.
Yeah.
But in this situation, it seems like it's reversed. That, for kids it's 6, and for someone older it's 5. I'm confused.
Yeah.
Straighten me out, Hannah.
So you're thinking it's reversed, like we should be pro early interventions?
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. I think where this lies is kind of what I was talking about, that because as humans, our brains are wired to learn, to pick up things and everything else. And we all know about neuroplasticity, how your brain will adapt and mold to things. We discovered that quite a long time ago. But when we talk about like specific learning disorders, we talk about the act of learning is a very complex brain activity, right? When you're talking about the way that your brain will learn and grow, that first 10 years of our brain is so crucial, because by 10 years old, your brain has now created so many different types of connections and molds and routes to talk to its other part of its brain. But those first years, when we're exposing kids to ABCs and communication and writing and skills, those parts of our brain, it becomes increasingly difficult to form those, what I call roads in our brain, which is if you form a new connection in a brain, like with writing, say we take writing, if you form that new connection, if we don't catch that early, that road to writing is going to be very difficult to pave as we get older, because our brain will become more concise and it would already have its connections there. And so we want to make sure that we catch it early, so those roads can be nicely paved over and not have to try to dig it out when we're older and our brain is already developed in a certain way.
It sounds a lot like the Michigan roads. They're filled with potholes, just like everywhere, as far as the eye can see. So I wish there had been a little bit of early intervention, and we could have just some nice, non-bumpy roads. That was a really good analogy.
Exactly. Yeah. I always use that as an explanation, because I think we're familiar with dirt roads and paved roads. And dirt roads are so much easier to make in a child's brain when it is just now forming a bunch of dirt roads, right? And so then getting into an older, say, adolescent or older child, their brain's already made a bunch of paved roads. And I'm coming in there trying to do a dirt road somewhere. And it's harder for that child to learn that skill or to get better at that skill. So not that it's impossible, they're definitely not impossible. You can definitely do it, but it's so much easier to correct that at 5 and 6 and 7 years old versus trying to take a 15-year-old and sit down and learn how to read. So it's definitely just looking at brain development and that neuroanatomy that's really going to help us to understand.
Okay, Hannah, let me ask you this. How do you tease apart whether it's like ADHD versus a specific learning disability versus both of those conditions happening simultaneously?
So that's a very common question, actually, especially when I'm tutoring or talking to other counselors about this. Yeah. So differentials are just broadly a skill of their own. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about that basic neuroanatomy of where these disorders take place, how it helps to understand that differential diagnosing part. But when you're reading on the exam, you're reading a case study on the exam, you have to remember that ADHD and specific learning disorders commonly will co-occur. This is partly because of the executive functioning center of the brain. Now, a key piece in distinguishing between them is whether the academic skill deficits remain even when the ADHD symptoms are well managed. Let's kind of break that down a little bit. So if a child exhibits reading difficulties that persist despite ADHD treatment, it points to a likely underlying reading disorder rather than the problem with tension or focus or whatever it may be, which could be the primary driver. So a lot of times for diagnostic purposes, we have to talk about the appropriate assessments. I am an assessments believer. I believe in them so much. Partially part of my training. I, was a psychometrist for a while during grad school and for a neuropsychologist. So I love my assessments. But for this one, for specific learning disorders, we can look at assessments like the Woodcock-Johnson, the Peabody Individual Achievement Test, the Wide Range Achievement Test, the Key Math 3 Diagnostic Assessment. For ADHD, we're looking at assessments such as the NICHQ Vanderbilt, the Child Behavioral Checklist, the Connors, and the Behavioral Assessment System for Children. That's not an exhaustive list. There are so many assessments out there to gauge both of these things, but I would say those are probably the most commonly used, especially when we're looking at something like the Woodcock-Johnson used in schools a lot.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh, do I have a favorite? Don't do that to me, Linton. I'll be here forever talking about my assessments.
Okay.
Good to know, Hannah. You're an assessment person. I like it.
And
wow.
Phone a friend.
Always talk about
assessments. Yeah, people have so much trouble with assessments.
It's a huge gap. It is. I see people for tutoring, and it's a huge gap. And I was a psychometrist for a pediatric neuropsychologist during my internship year as a therapist. And so all I did was assessments. I would do assessments one day. I would do therapy the next day, assessments one day, because assessments in the neuropsych world last from 8 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. You get like a 1 hour break for lunch. Like,
wow.
I did all of them.
Yeah. Was this back in were you still doing like pencil paper kind of stuff? Or are you doing, was that?
No, we were doing like the iPad. They have like that iPad.
Oh, yeah.
Now the Q Interactive, you can do the Whisk and the Whisk on there. I was doing the Whips for younger toddlers, preschool age. I will say, I think my favorite assessments are the IQ ones because they're fun. You get to have a whole variety of activities we're doing. And it's always just, I think it was a great time. So
did you ever do like the CAT with the kids?
I did the CAT. Yep, I've done that. Oh my gosh, I've done so many. I even ventured into doing retired football players assessments. So people who were they had CTE. So people from the 70s. So I got to meet some really cool footballers and do their cognitive assessments and stuff. So it was a great time. I love my little assessment training. It was great.
Oh, that's very cool.
Hey, Stacy, why don't you highlight 3 of the neurodevelopmental disorders that we covered today? Would you do that?
Yes. Okay. So we have spent been down a long dirt road talking about these neurodevelopment disorders. And so we'll do a quick recap here. So we started off with autism spectrum disorder, and this involves persistent, so longer term, persistent deficits in social communication and interactions, as well as restrictive and repetitive behaviors. Those are the keys there. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, involves, again, that persistent pattern of inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsivity, or both. And that needs to have lasted for at least 6 months and is present in, remember, multiple settings, so not just one place. And several symptoms must have been present before age 12. And that's even if you're an adult. So, like, you got to go back in time and look at what was going on before age 12. And then last but not least, we talked about specific learning disorders, which hinder the acquisition of those academic skills in areas like reading, writing, and or math. So we have a big thank you today to Hannah for being with us. And to our studious listeners out there, we wish you the very best of luck with your exam. And before we go, we'd also like to do a shout out to a nonprofit that was put together by a person many of you know, Barton Bott. It's called the Barking Ark, and you can check out the wonderful work that he's doing with animals at barkingark.org. Have I gotten everything, Linton?
You got it all. Yes.
All right, great. So until our next episode, just remember,
It's in there.